Disconnect. Yes, we are.
Great. Okay. So Shlomo, over to you for a slow warm-up.
Okay, well, good evening or good morning, everyone, and welcome to you from wherever you are in the world. Very special that you've joined us for the Shloshim of Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz Zatzal. And a very big thank you to the four partners who have put this session together. That's London School of Jewish. Okay, have you heard me up until now? Because I've just had a message to, okay, let me start again. So welcome to all of you from wherever you are in the world, and either good morning, good afternoon, or possibly even good night, depending on your location. And welcome to this very special event to commemorate the Shloshim of an extraordinary man, Rav Adin Steinsaltz, of blessed memory. And tonight is in fact the Shloshim. There are four partners for this event, and they are London School of Jewish Studies, LSJS, the United Synagogue, the Steinsaltz Center, and South Hampstead Synagogue as well. And a very big thank you, particularly to Rabbi and to Jackie for instigating the program. So we have a varied program tonight with some very special speakers and some speakers both from Israel as well. And in just a few moments, we're going to begin with a special message about Rav Steinsaltz from none other than the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu.
במלאת 30 לפטירתו של ענק הרוח, הרב עדין שטיינזלץ, אני מתקשה לצמצם את פעילותו לכמה מילים, אבל הייתי אומר שהוא נמנה על גדולי הרוח של עמנו בכל הדורות, וכמובן בזמן החדש, כי הוא עשה דבר מופלא, הוא הנגיש את התלמוד, את היצירה הכבירה הזאת, שהתפרסה לאורך דורות של בני עמנו, הוא הנגיש אותה לדור שלנו. הוא עשה את זה בצורה מופלאה, משום שהייתה לו את היכולת המורכבת הזאת, לפשט דברים מורכבים. הוא ידע לעשות את זה בבהירות שכלו, ברגישות האנושית שלו, ובמצבורי הידע הבלתי נדלים שלו. אני הכרתי אותו כשהלכתי לביתו ברחוב אגרון, ושוחחנו, והוא גם נתן לי שיעורים. הוא נתן לי שיעורים על התלמוד, ובשיעורים האלה הוא התפרס, הוא נפתח מיד להיסטוריה הרומית, לשורש המילים, אטימולוגיה, להתפתחות של התרבות העברית, של השפה העברית, לאירועי הזמן ההם ולאירועי הזמן הזה. הוא עשה את זה תמיד בהומור, באיזה חוט דק כזה של אפילו של אירוניה, אבל מתוך אהבה כל כך עמוקה למורשת של עמנו, לעברו, להווה שלו וגם לעתידו. ואני חושב שזה מה שהוא עשה, הוא הניח את יסודות העבר כיסודות לעתיד. ואני חושב שאנחנו חייבים לו חוב ענק. הספרים שלו, כמובן, נותנים לנו את משנתו, והם פה לא במקרה, וחסר פה גם הספר שלו הנפלא על התלמוד באנגלית, שגם מנגיש את התלמוד לעמים אחרים, לעולם כולו. וזה לא פלא שהעולם כולו הכיר בגדולתו. אני חושב שכולנו חייבים לו חוב עצום, ואני מבקש שילמדו אותו בבתי הספר שלנו. זה המינימום שאנחנו צריכים לעשות כדי להחזיר לו תודה על הברכה העצומה שהוא נתן לעמנו.
So there you are. How many other rabbis do you know of that have received accolades from the Prime Minister of Israel? We're going to travel all the way back to London now, and we're going to invite Rebbetzin Lindy Levine of South Hampstead to share with us some of her recollections. You're muted and you need to unmute. Now we can hear.
Good evening, everyone. Rabbi Steinsaltz in action. It is Seudar Shlishit on a Shabbat afternoon, and we're learning Gemara. Around the table, there is a sizable crowd. Some are familiar with Gemara, and some have never studied it before. Rabbi Steinsaltz says, I always think that the Gemara is like a wadi, a deep, dusty, stony ravine in the desert, which for a few days a year, when it rains, becomes an exquisite garden of plants and flowers, the colors of which dazzle. Together, our learning today, our effort and our concentration will make the wadi bloom. It is a Friday night singles dinner for young men and women from all over London. Several of the girls are upstairs in the synagogue flat speaking to me. Rabbi Steinsaltz enters. Would you like to join me in a thought experiment? He said with his usual twinkle in the eye. There were smiles, and everybody was eager to do so. I would like you to form a line from the tallest to the shortest women, please. I am not being rude, but this will open our eyes for this evening. The women did this, from the tallest to the shortest. And Rabbi Steinsaltz said in his inimitable way, now I know who is taller and not so tall, shorter and not so short, brunette, blonde, pretty or prettier. And yet, that tells me nothing about you. Your uniqueness lies within. It is your personality and your soul. Now go down and reveal some of that, and undoubtedly the evening will be a success. One of the young women said, I think the men need to hear that. He said, don't worry, I've already told them. Last, and very quickly, during the writing of my doctoral thesis, I had several wonderful conversations with Rabbi Steinsaltz, one of which was about some complicated idea between other and otherness. And we had a long, long talk, at the end of which he said, these are other people's ideas. We need to be certain of what our ideas are. Never let the tail wag the dog. Rabbi Adin, you are in Gan Eden, and we are here on earth, and you have left us with your manuscripts, your words, and your wisdom. And for this, we thank you and will forever be connected with you. May your memory be for a blessing.
What beautiful words. Thank you so much. We turn now to a person who's going to be well known. She is a guest, but she'll become a household name. That is Tzipi Hotovli, the new Israeli ambassador to London, who is not just the new Israeli ambassador to the UK, but also a Talmidah of Rav Steinsaltz. And let's hear a few words from her.
The first time that I met Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz was when I was a law school student. He impressed me so much. I remember this feeling that I met one of the greatest leaders of the Jewish world in our generation. Rabbi Steinsaltz made his mission for life to make all the Jewish heritage accessible to all Jewish people all around the world. No matter who you are, no matter how old you are, you can do something in order to be more connected to your Jewish identity. And I think this is the biggest thing that our generation needs. We all need to be more connected to our identity. And I think Rabbi Steinsaltz, with his big enterprise of books, of translating the Talmud, of bringing his Jewish assets to everyone all around the world, this is something that every Jew can feel connected. And I have a big gratitude to what Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz gave me as a Jewish leader. I met him when I was a parliament member and as a minister, and he always had the best advice of how to make sure that whatever we do is connected to every Jew around the world.
Thank you, Ambassador. We come back once again to London, and we're going to ask Rabbi Michael Laithner, who is the Director of Education at the United Synagogue, to share some of his ideas regarding the impact of Rav Steinsaltz. You're muted, Michael. Okay, you're unmuted now, we heard you.
No, still unmuted for me.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Good enough? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Shlomo, and also to Rabbi Zarim as well for organizing this event and providing this opportunity for us to mark the Shloshim. I first came across Rav Steinsaltz through his writings, particularly the Essential Talmud, which was really helpful to me when I was first in yeshiva. But I only met Rav Steinsaltz in a meaningful way in terms of conversations when I was fortunate enough to work alongside Rabbi Shlomo and Rabbi Lindsay in South Hampstead Shul for several years. And Rav Steinsaltz taught me some very significant things, which I'd like to try as briefly as I can to share with you this evening. And many of them were in South Hampstead when he came, but also subsequently on visits to Israel. Now, famously, the Gemara and Masechet Shabbat on Daf Lamed Aleph, Amud Aleph 31a, lists the various questions which a person would be asked when they get to Shamayim. And one of them is, Kavata itim la Torah. Did you fix times to learn Torah? And as Rashi notes there, life is busy. There's lots of derech eretz. I guess by that he means just the stuff we have to do every day, which needs to be done. If you don't fix time to learn Torah, then what will happen? And of course, one of Rav Steinsaltz's most monumental contributions to the Jewish people was giving us, through the Gemara, through the other books that he made, an opportunity every day to learn Torah wherever we are in an accessible format. And in his own commentary on that Gemara, he notes this is something which ideally you should do straight after davening in the morning. You daven, you learn, you're fortified, you go out into the world. And this is the kind of kaviyut which Rav Steinsaltz provided, which I have benefited from enormously from his works and from his teachings, and I'm sure many others have as well. There's another form of kaviyut, of things being fixed, which Rav Steinsaltz teaches us about. And it's a very different one. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in the 2nd chapter, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, says we should not make our tefillah, our prayer, something which is keva, something which is fixed, ela rachamim v'tachanunim, but instead asking for mercies and supplications before God. Why would this be the case? Every day we have fixed prayers. What is the Mishnah trying to teach us? And Rav Steinsaltz gives something which I found to be a very beautiful, impactful, and meaningful answer. And I think what is probably, for me at least, my favorite work of his. It's one which Rav Meni very kindly gave to me called Arba'a Sha'arim. And it is a book which I suppose, if anyone could write it, would only be Rav Steinsaltz. It has 4 parts to it: Halakha, Torah, Chazal, and Pnimiyut. Particularly the Pnimiyut side, really, I found very attractive from Rav Steinsaltz's writings. And it's all the kind of things which you would want a Jew to know about and to think about on a regular basis, combined into this 4-part book. And on this particular question, Rav Steinsaltz quotes the Sokochover Rebbe, Rav Avraham Bornstein, who says there's tefillah which comes from the heart, and it's something which is very, very profound within us. And there is tefillah which comes from the brain. He says the tefillah, the regular tefillah, which is the fixed one we have to do every day, is part of our obligations. And that comes from the brain. But the prayers which come from the heart are the ones which somehow refresh what we feel every day. They're the ones to think about our specific situation. Whereas the tefillot from the brain are the ones which remind us of what we need to pray for every day, remind us of what it means to be a Jew. This is the function of our tefillot. The tefillot that come from the heart speak to our particular situation and the particular context we are in. And this I learned from Rav Steinsaltz, not just through his writings, but through his example as well. I remember in Southampton, on one particular occasion, someone was giving me a hard time about the meanings of particular words in Hebrew. So one of them was parrot. So I said to Rabbi Steinsaltz, and I was walking in the Long Eaton Road with him, I said, Kavod Rav, he gave me a look for calling him that, but nonetheless, I called him that. I said, someone is really giving me a hard time about this, and I'm researching this, and I can't find an answer. What do you think I should say? So he looked at me with that twinkle in his eye that Robertson Lindsay spoke about, and said, I can find a root in 6 languages, but I think Serbo-Croat is the one you should tell him. So I went back to shul the next day, and I said, it's Serbo-Croat. And the person said, really? I said, Rav Steinsaltz told me that, and I'm not arguing with him about it. But he then subsequently gave me his own thoughts on this particular question. And it was wonderful to hear from someone with such an amazing grasp, not just of Jewish knowledge, but of languages as well. On another occasion, he tried to help me when I was dating. He said, you haven't got married yet? Come to New York. I'll take you to New York. You'll be okay. I'm going to look after you. And I was struck by the fact that here was someone with all of the responsibilities he had on his shoulder, who not only gave up on his own learning so he could teach others and research books to help others learn by themselves, but also would even look at a regular guy in the street and nothing like me and say, I'll give you time. I'll come and help you, whether it's intellectually or just with your life. And here was somebody who, going back to the idea of kviyut, I think understood the kviyut of what Torah learning means and how to apply it to a person, to make sure that we are people who are mevakesh, rachamanim, v'tachnunim, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and apply those to others as well. So I'm enormously grateful to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the privilege to have learned from such a person. And we should say Todah Lecha Hashem for the opportunity to have had such a person in our generation. We wish the family nechama, of course, and all we can say is, Yehi Zichro Baruch, may the Rav's memory continue to be for a blessing.
Thank you, Michael, for those lovely memories as well. And we turn now to Rabbi Jason Rappaport. He is the managing editor of English publications for Shefa. Shefa is the umbrella organization for all of Rav Steinsaltz institutes. So Jason, Rabbi Jason, tell us something about the breadth and the scale of this extraordinary man's writings and what's available to us in English. You're muted at the moment.
Right. Are we live?
Yes.
So as Rabbi Levine said, I'm the managing editor of Steinsaltz Translations. And as many of you will probably know, that comprises the Steinsaltz commentary on the Talmud. In English, that's the Noe Koran Talmud Bavli. Some of you also have seen the Steinsaltz Chumash, which is part of the 3-volume Steinsaltz Tanakh, which came out recently. In progress are a translation of the very popular Hebrew multi-volume Tanya commentary, working on that now. The volume should start coming out soon. Over the next few years, we will hopefully complete the whole project. It'll be something like 8 volumes in English. And the book that Rav Laithner just referred to, actually, is going to be published in English hopefully sometime this year. And you'll be able to find that, of course, on the Steinsaltz or Koran websites, or at your local Jewish bookstore also. We're also working on a full translation of the Rav Steinsaltz commentary on Talmud in French. I'm actually involved with that as well. The French is coming mainly from other people, not from me, but that's something we're working on right now as well. Just quickly tell you before we go into some anecdotes about Rav Steinsaltz, we are planning to translate, there's a Hebrew commentary on the Mishnah, which will be coming out soon, and the Rambam Hebrew commentary has been out already for a while. We are planning for and hoping very much to translate those 2 monumental works of commentary into English as well soon. I want to say, to preface what I want to say, by one little, maybe even cheeky comment from the Rav. I heard him say this more than once. It was almost like a theme for him. And it means much more than it sounds. What's the comment? He said in his gruff kind of way, I want to take away people's excuse for not learning. Now that he undoubtedly wanted to do. But what he really wanted to do was bring everybody into the great conversation that is Jewish tradition and Jewish learning. And by bringing them into that conversation, not at all to dictate to them what they might think or what they might say once they join that conversation. Rabbi is going to be on video later on, reading Rav Steinsaltz's last letter addressed to his family, students, and really everybody. One quote from there, which I'm going to share with you now. He said, this is the translation, he said it in Hebrew, continue to do things that strengthen the connection between all of the following: the God of Israel, the people of Israel, the world in its entirety, and the Torah. Now that sounds very lofty and maybe even unattainable, but that is in fact exactly what Rav Steinsaltz actually did himself. And I emphasize the phrase, the world in its entirety. We already heard a few anecdotes from previous speakers about how Rav Steinsaltz was so engaged with, obviously, Torah, the whole deep world of Torah, but also the wide world beyond, intellectually, culturally, really in every way. And he was genuinely enthralled with and engaged with the world, to use the phrase I just quoted, in its entirety. He was genuinely interested in literally everything. And not just in order to know or learn things, but in order to build his spiritual universe from as much diverse material as possible. We already referred several times to the sparkle in his eye, which showed an almost childlike curiosity about the world. Now, as a chassid, Rav Steinsaltz is in some ways a Chabad chassid, in some ways just a spiritual seeker in general. There's a phrase which many of you have probably heard before, Leit atar panui minei, which translated literally means there is no place vacant of him, meaning God, of course. That God is literally everywhere and in everything. For many people that know this phrase, it's often just a slogan. But Rav Steinsaltz really lived it and taught it. The Prime Minister referred earlier to the unique edition of the Gemara that he put out and authored over several decades. But let's just think about it for a minute. What do you have there? You have the Hebrew text, and the fact that the Hebrew text is vocalized and punctuated is part of that invitation, inviting people into the conversation. But the additional notes around that, the history, the geographical and cultural background, linguistic etymology, quoting words in Arabic, ancient Persian, Aramaic, etc., is not just obscurantism. It's showing that everything we touch has a fascinating backstory and is part of an incredibly rich tapestry of interconnectedness. I just want to share a couple of anecdotes from my interactions with Rav Steinsaltz. So I come to the centre periodically for meetings with Rav Meni and other people, staff members, including Rav Steinsaltz himself. I was lucky enough to work with him directly on the tiny commentary that I mentioned before. One time I was at Steinsaltz Centre for a meeting. He saw me and started talking casually about the etymology and the history of my surname, Rappaport. Another time, I came to his office, and I just, as part of a conversation, I said we should try and use our common sense for something that we were discussing. And he proceeded to recommend a good book analysing the notion of common sense in general philosophy. So the minutiae of Jewish history and genealogy and concepts in general culture and philosophy were all part of his incredibly rich spiritual universe. Many people are spiritual, intense, and that often is accompanied by a narrow, almost laser focus. Others are intellectual, cultured and broad. But almost no one is really genuinely both. Rav Steinsaltz was both. And all of his books, Hasidism, books about Jewish history and culture, the classic commentaries on the central text of Judaism, show that that is the way that we can be as well. I want to quote something else. He said in that same speech, let them attempt to become acquainted with the world, not to fear it, but to illuminate it with the light of God. And he really meant that. Nothing scared him. He engaged with everything with courage and honesty, while illuminating it with the light of God. A quick story from the Shiva. I was sitting with Rav Meni and Amachaya, his two sons, and somebody came along and sat down at the Shiva, and they said that they'd been asked to be a teacher at one of the Steinsaltz institutions. I'm very sorry, I'm alarm, I need to turn off. Sorry about that, forgot to turn it off before. So this person said that he was talking to Rav Steinsaltz, and Rav Steinsaltz said, come and teach in one of our institutions. And he said, but Rabbi, I don't know if you want me to come and teach in one of your institutions, because I deal with biblical criticism. Rabbi Steinsaltz's immediate reaction was, great, come and join us. But obviously, that was not because he believed in biblical criticism, but it was because he welcomed the intellectual stimulation that that person would bring to the discussion and to the students. He really wanted people to engage broadly and face challenges head-on, without shying away from or retreating to a cloister. When we were working on the Talmud, we sometimes asked him how to deal with some of the very controversial statements in the Talmud. Think about this. This is a translation, so you're thinking, we are now presenting the Talmud to the whole world. Should we think about this? Should we add some padding, explanations, apologetics or something? He said very simply, no, just say it like it is. People need the unadorned truth. They're mature, they'll work it out. So he was really empowering all of us to go out there and to build a deep, unapologetic, sensitive and nuanced spirituality that is, on the one hand, obviously deeply spiritual, Jewish, and also non-judgmental and intellectually honest. He did this in his life, every moment of his life, and he did it in his books. In his books, we for ourselves can see how to start this journey for ourselves and how to continue it. That's exactly what he wants us to do. Yehi zichro baruch.
Thank you, Jason. You've made us realize what a giant the world has lost. At the same time, you've also whetted our appetite for all of that lovely stuff that is still to come.
Good. Thank you.
And so we once again travel back to England, and we turn to Sima Weinberg, who had hosted Rabbi Steinsaltz, and can share with us some of her recollections. Sima? You're muted at the moment. We need to unmute you. Sima, you're still muted?
Okay.
Okay, we can hear you.
Rabbi Levine, I need to tell you that for the past 10 years, we've been living in Yerushalayim.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Sima. That's how long we haven't had contact.
Exactly. So there you go. I want to speak about Rav Steinsaltz from a very different angle. I want to speak about how I saw him and the impact that he had on me personally. When I first met Rav Steinsaltz, he had come to London to speak at a gala dinner for the Bet Midrash, which at that time was in Hendon, rather close. I was quite taken aback when I saw him, because I expected to see some giant, but instead, here was a man of small stature. His beard dominated his face, and as everybody has said, he had these twinkly blue eyes. He also had an enigmatic smile. When he smiled, you weren't quite sure what he was smiling about. And I found that fascinating. And I always loved the fact that he wore a blue shirt. So different. He had the ability to immediately connect with you, and you felt this impact that someone was standing in front of you, summing you up. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and I was very overwhelmed by his modesty. I think everybody was very aware of that. It was a privilege to have him be in our home. Everyone who came to have a personal meeting with him left the room on a high. They felt that they had met with somebody who understood them and had given them some chizuk to move forward in their lives. He encouraged and directed with a very gentle manner. You never felt that he was forcing his ideas upon you. He was making you think because of the words that he had used. I have two specific memories of him. He asked me to take him shopping at Brent Cross. He wanted to buy gifts for his wife. I couldn't believe that I was accompanying this giant of a rabbi on a shopping spree. He knew what he wanted, he knew what he was looking for, and he had a discerning eye and very good taste. My second memory is very personal. Rav Steinsaltz came to see us when we were sitting Shiva for our son, Mark. He sat very close to us, but didn't say much. One could see he was thinking and looking. When he got up to leave, he made some poignant remarks and then stepped forward and whispered in my ear, "Simma, remember to always be a smiling grandmother." That message very much helped me to move forward after a very difficult period in our lives. And for the past 10 years, his voice and words have resonated in my head, and I have endeavored to practice this profound message. Apart from his inimitable way of writing and teaching, I will always remember him as someone who understood people and knew how to encourage them to take the next step forward. I will always remember him with a smile, and may his memory be a blessing for us all.
Simma, thank you so much for sharing those very intimate messages with us, and giving us strength through the strength that he gave to you. Well, we're going to turn now to Rabbi Zaram, Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zaram, in his full splendor. Rabbi, you've had some great interactions with Rav Steinsaltz. Share them with us, please.
I will. Thank you, Shlomo, and thanks to the United Synagogue and the Steinsaltz Center for joining us for this event. And thank you, Simma and Lindy and Jason, for all those wonderful memories. And it's bringing, I'm getting emotional remembering. It's 2003. Jacqueline and I are living in Jerusalem on a fellowship program, and I get to go every day in the old city to Daf Yomi with my rabbi. And around the table are people with the regular Talmud, there's some people with the Art Scroll Talmud, and quite a few of them with the Steinsaltz Talmud. And don't ever underestimate, if it hadn't been for our Steinsaltz's translations of the Talmud already coming out the late 80s and 90s, there would be no Art Scroll Talmud. He single-handedly revolutionized people's connection to Talmud, not just in the religious world, but culturally all over. Every time I saw him, Israeli people came up and said, "Thank you, because of you I've begun reading Talmud." So he really did that. Not since Rashi was there someone who translated and commentated on the entire Talmud. So there we are, 2003. We do a particular difficult part of the Masechet. And someone says, Rav Steinsaltz says, and reads out to our Rav what Rav Steinsaltz says. My Rav said, that doesn't sound right. That's very unusual. Rav Steinsaltz is always right. What's going on here? So it was unusual, but he said, I don't know, we have to find out. So the shir ended, and I got on a cab to go back to the Mandel School along Emek Rafaim. And I'm in the car in Emek Rafaim. I look out the window, and who's walking down Emek Rafaim? Rav Adin Steinsaltz. So I jump out the cab, pay him quickly, the day before Uber, and I said, Rav Steinsaltz, we're doing the Daf Yomi today, and we saw a bit, and it didn't make sense what you said. He takes out a little pad he always had in his pocket, writes it down, says, "Thank you, Afi." He kind of remembered me. I introduced myself. I hope you remembered me. And said, "I'll check it and make sure it's correct." And he walked off. And I looked up and I just thought, the world that I live in, that the man who commentated on this book is in Jerusalem right here. And you can go and talk to him. It was an incredible moment. But why did he know me? Because 10 years earlier, in 1993, I remember I was running a sixth form centre with Daniel Schreiber in Jewish College, London School of Jewish Studies, as it is now. And he came to talk to the sixth formers, right? It was a Sunday morning. It was always very hard when these big rabbis came in. Would they take him seriously? Right? They'd all sit and chat. So he walked in quietly. This is 1993, the time someone mentioned he came to London. And he walks in, he said, "Have you got a pen?" And he went on the blackboard and he spent a minute drawing the most beautiful and cute little cat. And the entire room went silent. So by the time he turned around and began speaking to them, they were all interested. What's this rabbi going to say? That's what he was like. But the story I'm going to tell, and maybe it'll end my career, but Shlomo and I said I should tell it, is this. It's really close to Daf Shlishit. And he gets up to speak, and he's very naughty. And this is why I fell in love with him in 1993. Because he starts talking about, unfortunately, the growth of suicide in society and the problems of people not valuing their lives. And he talks about different forms of suicide. And I'm thinking, where's he going? And then he talks about that one way of doing it, it's very sad, that someone can go in a hot bath and slit their wrist. It's a very horrible thing to do. And gradually the blood comes out and they lose consciousness. They go into a coma and then pass away. And he said that people do that because it hurts the least. And he paused and he said, and you know, that reminds me of Anglo Jewry in a coma. And the entire place went crazy. What are you saying? How dare you? And I was at the back thinking, finally, someone willing to challenge us. He said, wake up. You're asleep. What are you doing? You're just going along to these old traditions. What are you doing? Wake up. And he was willing to take that risk. People agreed with him that evening. They just agreed. But they all remembered. We flick forward now to 2013 when I'm running LSJS, as I am now right here. And he comes to visit. And I'm nervous because I know he always thinks we're, you know, half asleep Anglo Jewry. And he walks into the college and I show him around. And I said, we're trying, Rav Steinsaltz, we're trying. And he says, you know, Rafi, he says, even in a coma, sometimes people have fits of semi-consciousness. And maybe LSJS right now is one of those maybe moments of semi-consciousness. And I had a big grin, thank God. For him, that was a great compliment. That maybe we're half awake as a result. This man influenced me in so many ways. And Shlomo and I decided that I'll just mention 3 books that I basically want you to buy. One in Kabbalah, one in Tanakh, in Bible, and one in Torah. The first one, in terms of Kabbalah, this book. It's called The 13 Petals Rose. That's one version of it. It's just come out more recently as well. The 13 Petal Rose. In a very thin book of less than 200 pages, he summarizes what is Jewish mysticism. And he makes it sensible and reasonable. You can follow and understand it. And it's very special. I've quoted it in this little booklet that I've done for Rosh Hashanah this year. And he says we have to move beyond this normal world. He says it takes both time and considerable introspection to get beyond the elaborate mental constructions, the words, the ideas divided by everyone. You have to get beyond them. So this book, The 13 Petaled Rose, and he explains the title at the beginning, really will help you as a basic book. So it's a discourse on the essence of Jewish belief existence, but it's really, I think, about Kabbalah mysticism. And it's a brilliant summary of the subject. The second book that was transformative was one called Biblical Images. There's many versions of it. I've got the purple one at home. What was Biblical Images? It started off with his speeches on Israeli radio. And he basically took the characters of Torah and just analyzed them psychologically as if they're lying on a sofa. But what were they like as people? And some people were upset with him saying that because instead of seeing these as otherworldly, brilliant Rabbanim who you couldn't relate to, they suddenly became real and alive. He talked about the difficulty of Isaac being a continuer. How do you continue what your father began? Abraham was Abraham. He began this whole new faith, returned to God. And Isaac had to continue. He had to dig the wells that his father dug. He had to do the same things that his father did. And what is it like to be a continuer? It was an incredible series of radio shows turned into a book, Biblical Images. Go onto Google or Amazon, type in Steinsaltz Biblical Images and buy it. It brings them to life beautifully. And the third book is his now commentary on the Torah, a modern commentary. You might have your Steinsaltz, you might have your Art Scroll or your Hertz, and please God in 5-6 years we'll have a Rabbi Sachs. But in the meanwhile, get your Steinsaltz Torah. It's got pictures, it's got explanations of key words. It's a really good commentary on the Torah. So those are 3 books that I suggest that you get. Number 1, The 13 Petaled Rose. Number 2, Biblical Images, and number 2 is commentary on the Torah. And I understand he's got one on the whole Tanakh now as well. So Rav Steinsaltz should have a few books in your library. and he should be part of your world. May his memory be a blessing. People will be learning his books and his ideas for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafi. That is great. Well, just before we move to our next speaker, I just want to come back to Simmer and Rav Steinsaltz's blue shirt, because he was actually hauled up before one of the great Hasidic Rebbes. I believe it was the Gerer Rebbe who summoned him and told him that it was inappropriate for a person of his stature to be wearing a blue shirt. And he said to the Rebbe, tough, he said, that's who I am. Which was just great. That was him all over. Okay, so now we turn to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. This recording has a few seconds of silence to start with, so don't be disturbed. But this is Rabbi Sachs speaking about Rav Steinsaltz.
The Talmud tells the story of that remarkable day, epoch-making day actually, when the rabbis decided to depose Rabban Gamliel as Nasi, as religious head of the community, because of the disrespectful way in which he behaved towards Rabbi Yoshua. And the Talmud tells us that on that day, they opened the doors of the Beit Midrash, and they added many, many benches. Some say 400, some say 700. In other words, Rabban Gamliel had tried to restrict entry to the Beit Midrash and said that the only people who could enter were those who were Tochot the Baro, whose inside was as their outside. He was very exacting of the people he would let in to the yeshiva. And the rabbi said, no. Once we depose him, we jettison that principle and we open the doors of the Beit Midrash as widely as possible. The Talmud then says in an extraordinary story that night Rabban Gamliel had a dream, and in his dream he saw whited sepulchres filled with ashes. In other words, he saw in his dream that all those people with the nice outsides, the white exteriors, were in fact fully empty. There were just ashes. The dream seemed to support Rabban Gamliel's approach to admission to the Beit Midrash. And the Gemara says, Velohi, wasn't true at all. Heaven only showed him that dream, so he shouldn't be upset. Because if he really thought about it, he would never have forgiven himself to the end of his days that he had withheld Torah from Israel. So heaven put his mind at rest. But he was completely wrong. God wants the doors of the Beit Midrash opened wide. That was the extraordinary work done by the late Rav Adin Steinsaltz Zechet Tzadik Livracha. He opened the doors of the Beit Midrash wide in a way that hadn't been done since Rashi wrote his commentary to the Gemara 1,000 years earlier. It was an extraordinary, extraordinary achievement. Before the Steinsaltz Gemara, you could not open a Gemara and somehow hope to teach yourself what it meant. There was no way. But once the Steinsaltz Gemara was there, you could. The doors were opened wide, and Adin understood why. This was not a stray aspiration of his. He knew that the very essence of Judaism depends on the democratization of knowledge so that everyone in Judaism can say, not only do I keep the law, but I understand the law as well. Every Jew is encouraged to be a constitutional lawyer. Well, we know how challenging an undertaking that was. I didn't thought it would take 13 or 14 years. In the end, it took 45. I often say the greatest kindness Hashem ever does for us is he never lets us know in advance what we are letting ourselves in for. But despite that extraordinary length of undertaking, Adin never halted, never gave up, never despaired, just kept going with that and his many, many other commentaries to many other books. When we look today at the numbers of people studying Gemara, people who would never have dreamed of doing so in any previous generation, as was witnessed by the Siyum of the Daf Yomi not that long ago, and the extraordinary women's Siyum Daf Yomi, likewise. That is Rav Steinsaltz's zechut. He made this possible. I know a father and daughter who would never have considered studying Talmud before, who took it on themselves, even though he was in one place and she was in another, to study a Daf Yomi together right through that Daf Yomi cycle. And they did not miss a day, and they did so for all those 7+ years. I could not believe I was seeing this. I have a Jewish artist in our community who would never have considered studying Talmud before, who took on herself to study a Daf Yomi and actually produced an artwork for every single day of Daf Yomi, inspired by the Daf. It is not unfair, therefore, to say that our generation has seen a sea change in Talmud study of the like of which it would be hard to find a precedent for. And that is Rav Steinsaltz's zechut. We know that the greatest honor anyone can have in Judaism is to be called Rabbeinu. For our generation, Adin Steinsaltz was Rabbeinu. And for many, many generations to come, people will find the doors of the Beit Midrash opened through his zechut. May he derive much comfort in the world of truth. And may we continue to remember him with fondness, with great gratitude, and with great kavod. This was one of the great Jews of our time and all time.
So Rav Steinsaltz writes that on one occasion he wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory and explained to him that he was involved in a number of different projects, all of which by themselves were absolutely full-time. And he asked the Rebbe to assist him in prioritizing which projects he should continue to work on and which ones he felt that he could put to one side for the moment. And the Rebbe answered to him, you should continue with all the projects that you're involved with, and you should add a few more. I used to hear from Thomas Nissel of blessed memory that he would walk into the Rav's study at early in the morning at 6 o'clock, and the Rav's pipe was still warm because he'd only just left. Sami Rubin, entrepreneur, teacher, and longtime Talmid of Rav Steinsaltz. You saw him the last weeks of his life. Please share some of your recollections.
Thank you. I was indeed really fortunate to spend the last 6 months here in Yerushalayim. And as Rafi and Asima said, back in 1993, when we brought Rabbi Steinsaltz over as a guest speaker, when we set up the Bet Midrash, I was then introduced to Rav Steinsaltz for the first time. And at that time, I had many rabbis, but Rabbi Steinsaltz became my Rebbe. He accompanied me the last close to 30 years. I remained close to him from that first visit. We had many conversations for sometimes hours at a time. I went through my ups and downs, and he was like an anchor for me, always guiding me higher, sometimes bringing me down to earth when I need to be brought down to earth. But he was there as an anchor and as an inspiration throughout my life. He also participated in my family's simchas. He held my firstborn son at his bris when he was named. And when we spent some time in Yerushalayim, Rabbi Steinsaltz was our neighbor. So my family got to know him as just, in a way, a friend. He was always approachable, always so humble, down to earth. Who would have known that the great Rabbi Steinsaltz was just living around the corner? And the last 6 months, I found myself back in Yerushalayim, even though I was living in London at the time, but I came here just before Corona, and we ended up staying here as a family, and we've been here for the last 6 months. And I have to say, what a blessing. I will treasure these past 6 months. I'm feeling emotional as I think about it now. And the main reason why is because we had a minyan with Rabbi Steinsaltz. The students of Rabbi Steinsaltz set up a minyan for him just around the corner at the Nature Museum in the German colony, for those who know it. And every Friday night and every Shabbat morning, we prayed with the Rav. We stayed with the Rav after davening, and we shared Torah. We danced with the Rav. Very unfortunately, you may know that 4 years ago, Rabbi Steinsaltz experienced a stroke, so he lost the power of speech. But yet he was fully aware. He was able, through his eyes and his presence, to make that connection. You always felt that he acknowledged you. And my wife, my children, whenever they would come and wish him Shabbat Shalom, he was always there acknowledging, and with his glint in his eyes, still smiling. That smile was there. I was very fortunate. We finished the Siyum of Brachot with my son. We finished the Daf Yomi, and we actually did the Siyum of the Brachot with Rabbi Steinsaltz there. I was just sort of overcome by emotion at the time, but it was a beautiful setting. And I just want to really bring forward just to the last Shabbat that he was with us. It was about just a week or so before he passed away. It was his last Shabbat in the Nature Museum, and it coincided with his 83rd birthday. And we prayed, we davened all together in the shul with nigunim, and at the end of the davening, we brought out a birthday cake for the Rav, and we danced around him, and then we went round, we had a circle, and we shared our own blessings to the Rav. And we were asked to go around and just say one thing that the Rabbi did to impact our lives. And there was a man next to me who was a medical doctor. And he said, Rabbi Steinsaltz, without you, I would never have become a doctor. I was not sure, and you encouraged me, and it changed my life. Even though I had to study overseas, I'm now a doctor because of you. And we did the L'chaim. Then on my right, Rav Meir Hanegbi. Rav Meir Hanegbi was his editor for close to 35 years. They'd been learning, studying together for so many years, and he helped to edit his books. And Rav Negbi said to him, Rabbi Steinsaltz, you taught me how to think for myself. Before I met you, I was often told I have to regurgitate. It's about just receiving wisdom, but I wasn't taught to think for myself. You taught me to come up with my own ideas, my own creativity, and to think for myself. And for that, I will always treasure you. And then when I gave my turn, I shared as follows, that Rabbi Steinsaltz, for me, and he always said this to me, he said, life is a ladder, which is mutzav arza, its root is in the ground, but it's rosha magia hashamayma. The head of the ladder is towards the heaven. This is the symbol of Jacob's ladder. And it says, each of us has to remember this. We have to be firmly planted in the ground, but we have to really have our heads towards heaven. He says there's so many people that get caught up just in their heads in the heaven, but they don't stay grounded. And there are those who are just caught up in the earth and so grounded, but yet don't have their heads in the heaven. And the art of being a Jew is to have both. Be grounded firmly in this world. And so he was. He knew so much, literature and science and everything in the world, politics. Ambassadors came to speak to him. So grounded, but yet his head was always in the heaven. And that for me will always be the lesson that he taught me, to be that ladder. May his memory be a blessing for all of us and for the whole world.
Thank you, Sammy, and we wish you many, many wonderful memories. And so it's time to hear Rav Steinsaltz's voice himself, to hear from him what he wanted to say to us. And therefore we turn now to his son, Rabbi Meni Eben Israel Steinsaltz, who's now the executive director of the Steinsaltz Center, who is going to share with us Rav Steinsaltz's words to us and to the world.
He will eliminate death forever, and the Lord God will wipe tears from all faces. On behalf of my mother, my brother, my sister, the entire family, myself, the Steinsaltz Center, and Rabbi students, we would like to thank heartily to all those who show us tremendous amount of love, give us condolences in these hard times, and all of you who joined today to commemorate 30 days since my father's departure. 40 years ago, my father underwent a life-threatening operation. Before the operation actually took place, my father sat down and wrote a short will and testament that he personally instructed to give to one of his best friends, Mr. Dan Segre. After the success of the operation, Mr. Segre returned the letter to my father, and my father kept it through all those years. Shortly before his stroke, Rabbi transferred the message to a trusty individual. The family decided to share with you this last words and testament from my father. To my family and friends, here are a few matters that have occupied my mind and captured my heart. With all sincerity and candor, I always sought the welfare of the Jewish people, and I desired to form a bond between the Jewish people and the Almighty. God bless His name. The desire filled my heart, and for the sake and to achieve this goal, I accomplished all that I accomplished. My actions were perhaps self-oriented, but I love the Jewish people and I love God. And with all my heart, I sought these two loves, and I acted for their sake. It may not have been adequate, but I acted with all my heart. I leave you with few requests. All material things of honors and tributes are no interest to me, and they never preoccupied me. However, I do have a request from all my friends whom I love, who love me. Help raise my children in a way which we desire. Jews who are complete in the ways of God and men, who walk in the path of Chassidut, and who always remember to love Jews in spite of the shortcoming, as well as every individual Jew. Let them strive to become acquainted with the world without fear, but with the only goal to illuminating it with the light of life. Here's another request for everyone. I wanted to accomplish many, many, many things. Believe me, it was not for my own glory. A fire burned within me for the sake of God and for the sake of Mashiach. If I knew that others were accomplishing this work better than I, I would have retreated to a modest corner. God is my witness. I never imposed myself, nor did I ever push myself forwards in order to seek honor or power, or anything that may resemble them. But I wanted to accomplish many, many things. I beg you, fulfill the task which I sought to undertake. Continue to accomplish all that is strengthening the bond between the God of Israel, the people of Israel, the world in its entirety, and the Torah. So these four will remain inseparable, like God's holy name. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The vast works of the Steinsaltz Center is continuing in full strength ahead. The concise guide to Judaism we published shortly, same as the second volume translation and commentary. The new translation of the Tanya in English, and the new typesetting of the Tanya in Hebrew, as well as the monumental work on the Talmud to be translated to French is undergoing. Our app that we've been talking about for many months is almost ready to be launched in the next coming months. And so we have many other books and works of the rabbis, including audio and videotapes, that we have to move forward, to archive them, to organize them, to move them forward. Dear friends, on our website, you will find a form that asks you to join us, to participate, to take upon yourself something new. If it's a new commandment, a new mitzvah, a new action, maybe learning, or maybe just supporting the Steinsaltz Center and, of course, the Rabbi Institution. Please, friends, help us to move the Rabbi dream, what he wanted to accomplish, to bring the bond between those four things of God of Israel, the people of Israel, the world in its entirety, and the Torah. Thank you so much.
Well, moving words that bring tears to the eyes. So that's our presentation for tonight. And after we've heard all of these beautiful and inspiring and moving and sad and uplifting words, I think we have to say a prayer of gratitude to Almighty that we have been privileged to live in the same world as Rav Steinsaltz, to be alive at the time that he was alive. In years to come, there'll be people who will study his works just as we study the works that have been mentioned several times tonight of Rashi and of other great sages who for us are only just history. But Rav Steinsaltz for us is not history. He's part of our lives. We've been touched by him, every one of us in some special way. And a little bit of him remains embedded inside of us. He made our lives brighter, more exciting, more challenging, and a lot less comfortable. The great thing for me about Adin was that he asked the questions that no other rabbi, no other commentary I've ever come across was prepared to ask. They're the questions actually that we all ask, and we have no one to give us the answers. And he articulated them and answered them. That's why he was so special. Thank you all for sharing this past hour with us. We're going to formally end this Zoom session, but please do remain on, and Rafi is going to take over from this point. And there'll be an opportunity for all of you people who are with us from all the different parts of the world to be able to share your recollections if you wish. And please, Rafi will tell you the best way to do that by just submitting your chats, and he'll pick them up, and we'll continue the session in a more informal way after this very special moment. So thank you for joining us. And if you're going to be leaving us now, Good night to you all. God bless you. And may we take the spirit of Rabbi Adin and bring it into our lives and further his work as well. Rafi?
Thank you. Thank you, Shlomo. Thank you so much for running that and making it so clear in your beautiful words at the end there that are moving us all. And we're going to stay on just for a few minutes. If people want to write in the chat they'd like to say something, then I'll refer to you and we can find you. So while I'm just going to do a few words now, you can put yourself in the chat, but we're going to stop the recording now. Sarah, I'd like to thank Sarah for organising this and for Cliff as well for making